I'm Professor Fryer from the Entrepreneurship Department in the Business School, and most people realize I never wear these jackets, but I did today, so I guess I have to get up here. And I dropped my car off with the mechanic this morning, and while I was standing with the mechanic, a bird dropped on me, a turd. And for you Romans, that's supposed to be great good fortune. I just consider it to be a dry cleaning bill. And then my mechanic proceeded to tell me that my car was undrivable. So I was trying to figure out what my great good fortune is. My great good fortune is to be able to introduce this panel. I tried, man. It's a true story, though. You know, I had to go with it. So first we have Denise Dunlap. She's a assistant professor in the College of Business. She has developed a very extensive database on pharmaceutical companies and has been doing a series of studies on how pharmaceutical companies exchange information across their country borders. We have Kareem Lakhani from Harvard Business School. He's an associate professor. He's also out of the stable of Eric von Hippel at MIT, so he has been doing research on collaborative research for a long time. He's involved in very many activities. The most recent one, the one I know most for, is Catalyst, which is Harvard's version of trying to get people across Harvard to deal with each other, and he just got a nice paper in the Sloan Management Review. So he will talk about his research. And the third person is Matt Alice. And Matt Alice is a senior program manager at EMC. Northeastern, we love EMC because many of our buildings are named after their people. So we love Matt. But Matt also brought some of his posse from his program in the high-tech MBA, and I'm sure they'll show him as much respect and deference as they do their teachers in the program. So I will turn it over to each of you to give your spiels, and then we'll have questions at the end. So Denise, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to Gloria and to Tucker for a really wonderful conference, and I'm really excited that I have this opportunity to share with you the paper that John and I worked on together about organizational ambidexterity and the pharmaceutical industry and how international knowledge sharing affects this process. Let me just kind of start off with sort of the way that this project worked and why we were interested in it. And actually, in the previous panel, and I don't believe David's here anymore, but he did mention this quote that many of us are familiar with, which is from Hewlett-Packard. He said, if we knew what we knew, we would be 3 times as profitable. So this started me to think about what do we know in terms of international knowledge sharing, right? And how well are firms doing sharing knowledge across borders and specifically with their subsidiaries, okay? Right now, many in the international business field, we have multinationals which feel that they, are strong about developing subsidiaries overseas, but do we really, harness the knowledge in those subsidiaries? Do we really utilize them? So we have this kind of parent-child relationship. So we wanted to look at how firms successfully utilize knowledge within the firm and specifically with their subsidiaries. And we wanted to know how that affected the firm's ability to develop breakthrough and incremental innovations. So we know that organizational ambidexterity is important. We know that firms cannot spend all of their time developing breakthroughs at the expense of developing incrementals. We know that they have to develop both simultaneously. It's important. And so for this particular paper, we wanted to see how cross-national knowledge sourcing affected both types of innovations. And, it's obviously very difficult to do both simultaneously, but firms realize that they have to do both. So what were the overall goals of this research? What did we want to accomplish? What do we want to do? And obviously this figure leads into many more projects that I have down the line, but I'll just talk about this particular project right now. We already know a lot about how firms are going overseas and where that they're choosing to strategically locate their subsidiaries. We know a lot about that. We know a lot about how firms are, whether or not that they should be competency creating subsidiaries or that they should be subsidiaries in which we are simply, asking them to assemble parts and do this. What we don't know a lot about is how firms are utilizing this information overseas. It's a rich pool of knowledge, but are they utilizing it successfully in the innovation process? And we are kind of wondering whether or not this knowledge that, so if I'm Pfizer and I have headquarters here and I have headquarters dotted throughout the rest of the world, how is the knowledge that I could acquire in India, how is that knowledge utilized? Does that affect my ability to create a new breakthrough, which we call scientific success? Or how would that affect my ability to develop a market success, which would mean a blockbuster drug like Viagra or something like that? So our focus for this particular paper was on are firms really utilizing the knowledge within their subsidiary network? And the reason why we found this to be important is because many of us, read the news lately, and we realize that developing breakthroughs, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, is extremely expensive. I have looked at the pharmaceutical industry in many different lenses. I currently have a database where I look at clinical trials, and we know that in oncology, for instance, that there are 922 treatments right now in the pipeline. And it's costing companies like $1.4 billion, but only 8% are actually approved. So it's quite expensive. So we were trying to say, is there something that we can offer and tell people about how firms are creating breakthroughs? We also know, which is kind of surprising, we know that actually the highest level of breakthroughs in the pharmaceutical industry happened in 1996. And since then, there has been a slow decline of the number of breakthroughs. And we've been trying to chase that by increasing our R&D. But as much as we continue to keep increasing it through our R&D, it's not manifesting in more breakthroughs. So we have the money, we're spending the money, but it's not equating to more breakthroughs. So what else is going on here? We also know another issue that's happening for many firms, and particularly Pfizer. They, over the last 3 years, are losing 3 of their top-selling breakthrough drugs. And it's equating to 41% of loss of revenue. So it's not surprising that we see that they're closing down plants, that 10,000 people are losing their jobs. So, what's kind of going on here? So this, for this particular study, it kind of made us try to think about, are firms really collaborating well, right? Are they really successfully utilizing the knowledge from outside of their network? And so there's been a lot that's been studied and said that firms should utilize knowledge outside of their network, that there are competency-creating subsidiaries, that there's this rich pool of knowledge. But the question is, are they utilizing it effectively? And there's a lot that, I was happy to hear, like the first presentation and a couple other ones that said that there's a lot of reasons why it would be difficult for us to share knowledge, right? Because of IT issues, and the guy from Continuum talked about the fact that, like, when I get on a conference call, I feel uncomfortable, right? I feel like, there's going to be a technology problem or this problem or that problem. And so I kind of feel like as, IT increases, that it's going to allow us to share knowledge more effectively. But right now, there's still some difficulties. And there's also some issues with regard to certain subsidiaries. They feel like they know what's best, or they kind of feel that they're lost. And they feel that, why should I'm not part of the network, so why should I share this information? So we have this great network out there, but we're not maybe utilizing it effectively. So in our model, what we said is that there's this rich pool of knowledge, and that we feel that as firms continue to take advantage of the knowledge that it already knows, we're not trying to chase and go get new knowledge. We're just trying to take advantage of the knowledge that we already possess. If we do this, we're not going to have to be spending more money on R&D, right? And we're going to be taking care of the knowledge that we already have in-house. So this should increase the firm's ability to develop breakthroughs. So how did we do this? We looked at 70 different firms over a 10-year period, And we gathered a lot of information on a lot of different products, almost 4,000 products. And we were able to look at how firms were sharing knowledge through patent citations. Okay? And so just kind of like overall, what we found is not surprising, but we looked at breakthroughs and we labeled this as new molecular entities. And we found that on average, we'll be lucky if a firm was able to develop one. But on the other hand, they're developing potentially 20 or more. So they're able to develop a lot of incrementals, but not as many breakthroughs. So what were our overall findings? I guess ambidexterity was really difficult for firms, right? It's interesting when you look at the data, you can see that certain firms, particularly small firms, which isn't that surprising, small firms were really good at developing breakthroughs, right? And then there were some other firms that we found that were really large and they were really good at developing incrementals. But we didn't find that there were necessarily firms that were good at developing both. And that might be a reason why we find in Tucker in our previous study before that large firms will buy out small firms, as we know, because they have possessed that knowledge, right? So what we found in terms of incremental innovation is we found that regardless of how much knowledge you shared overseas, it didn't make that much of an impact in terms of whether or not the firms were able to create more incrementals. What the real thing we found is like just how big the overall firm is, how much money that they're putting towards R&D. That made the most impact of whether they were able to develop the next incremental innovation. We did, however, find that that the most important resource within the firm is the knowledge that it already possesses inside of itself. So we found that firms that were able to harness or able to develop a network structure that they already have subsidiaries in India and China and these different places, that they were able to share this knowledge back with one another, that they were the ones that were able to develop more breakthroughs than everybody else. We feel that there needs to be, we need to not be chasing other knowledge that, it's not that we don't want to be abreast of other knowledge that's happening out there, but we need to try to find a way to utilize the information that we already have in-house, develop a better parent-child relationship. And we did this by, kind of developing these maps, if you will, maps of where the knowledge is coming from, who's developing what and where. And this particular map I have here is looking at patents, about roughly 2,400 different patents, and it's kind of saying, okay, where is the knowledge coming from? The knowledge is mostly coming from the United States. It's not that surprising. And then secondarily, it's coming from Europe. So we find that on average, when firms are sharing knowledge back and forth with one another, that about 90% of the knowledge sharing is still occurring between developed countries. About 2 years ago, I was asked to speak and work with the United Nations because they had asked me to ask some questions about, well, what's happening in these emerging markets? And they were saying, is the pharmaceutical industry, and specifically, are they sharing knowledge with emerging market countries? And so I showed them this map, and they didn't make them very happy because emerging markets really aren't on the map. So I have since then looked at different maps, going back now to the early stages, which is the clinical trials, and you can start to see that innovation is occurring. But right now, you can't see that, okay? But that also tells us that maybe that even though we don't see it right now, it doesn't mean that the firms shouldn't be sharing knowledge with back and forth between emerging markets. So what we found, though, was that only 12% of firms were sharing knowledge within their own internal subsidiary. So most of the knowledge was coming outside of themselves rather than inside of themselves. So what we kind of said, our overall conclusion is that, and maybe this has to do with the parent-child relationship. So you have the home, which is the parent, and then you have the host, which is the child. So, we do a pretty good job of telling our children what we want you to do, right? And we have historically, for multinationals and subsidiaries, historically, we probably have looked at them as outposts, looked at them as assemblers, looked at them as doing this and this. We tell them what to do. But we didn't really recognize that they were actually learning things that we could learn from them. The host is an important part because not only are they learning what's going on in their particular country, they are interacting with other foreign firms or interacting with local firms in that community, and all of that gets transpired back into that subsidiary. That's a lot of rich knowledge, right? And we're not taking advantage of it. So our focus was to see that if firms were taking advantage of it, would that affect breakthroughs? And we found that that was the most important source of breakthrough innovation. So where is this going towards, and what should firms be doing? We're finding, and this again is on the, many of us aren't surprised about this, we're finding that there's a slowdown of developing breakthroughs in developed markets, and that there is an increase in developing innovation and emerging markets. There's a greater need. So as we move forward, I think what we need to take a look at is how are firms accessing the knowledge in these emerging markets, right? And we're not really doing much of anything. They're really not on the map. So this could be an exciting piece to see how this evolves over time. Okay. Thank you.